Bienvenue et welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our first panel, our fireside chat with Brad, and that great conversation with Chris. I also hope you've had a chance to grab an afternoon coffee, stretch your legs a bit, get some fresh air, because we're about to dive into our second panel discussion of the day called Canadians Moving Canadians. So here to introduce it, it's my pleasure to invite Neil Paike, CEO of Newport Aviation, to the screen. Neil, the floor, or I should say the screen, is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carl, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today and represent the airport from the downtown Billy Bishop or Toronto City Airport, as I prefer it to be known. And it's great to meet some esteemed colleagues and discuss on the ways transit operations and operators continue to innovate and facilitate safe and efficient movement of Canadians within their communities. So we own and operate, I'm the CEO of Newport Aviation. We own and operate the terminal at Billy Bishop Airport, have done for 6 years now. We're very happy that we've had a return to operation, obviously. Things are picking up. We're getting up to about 50% or thereabouts of where we were pre-pandemic. So it's an upward trajectory. We're looking forward to more people returning to work, etc. downtown, so that because there is a correlation between that and also the numbers of conventions, etc. that the city will welcome in. So we connect about 3 million passengers every year with key business hubs across Canada and the US. Before the pandemic, we were basically accounting for about $2.5 billion pounds of economic benefit to the City of Toronto. Latest studies actually show that to be about 4.9 billion to the economy here. So we're not shirking away from our responsibility to Toronto to actually make sure that we deliver and continue to deliver that positive economic impact going forward. One of the just two comments. One of them is to do with the US pre-clearance. We see that US pre-clearance facilities here would enhance that economic impact even further. People want to have that fast way of getting in and out of the US. It's been promised a long time. President Obama, it was, with Prime Minister Trudeau, who first promised it, the delivery of that here. So that's one of our focal points for improving moving Canadians between here and the US market. Another comment is really about the landside connectivity here. What we're looking for is to be part of an improving transit system along the waterfront here. There's the Ontario line, for example, and other things. If this was London City Airport would be front and center of reasons why you should have such a line. The last mile connectivity here is not the best in class. We welcome inward investors, inbound business tourists from the US, and if you are a passenger with reduced mobility, etc., it's not clever, really. The last piece here, we operate the transit buses, so we are a transit operator ourselves. We operate the shuttle buses to Union Station and back, but I don't think that's enough. So we're looking very much to be part of solutions for transit that would embrace the airport and recognise the role of the airport in the economy of Toronto and the need for us to be part of the connectivity solutions. So with all that, I'd just like to introduce Robin Guy. I was interested to read about Robin briefly. He not only was Robin Chief of Staff at the Ontario Ministry of Sport and a policy advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. More interestingly for me, anyway, it was his sporting background and the fact that on the board of directors for the Ontario Curling Association. Now, you may have picked up I'm Scottish, and we have a passing interest in curling. So I now know who to invite should there ever be a Canada versus Scotland curling competition. Not that I would fancy Scotland to win it, but you never know. And also as a past director of the Volleyball Canada. So lots of things to talk to Robin about, both socially and obviously with his esteemed background and work. So with that, I'd like to just pass over to Robin, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Neil, and good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for joining today for our second panel entitled Canadians Moving Canadians. My name is Robin Guy. I'm the Senior Director of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Regulatory Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Transportation is a key issue, especially when it's a country as large as ours. It's an issue that affects all Canada, from large communities to small, from those who are trying to get to work and those who are traveling throughout our country. It's an engine of job creation and helps get Canadians and our products where they need to go to grow our economy. Transportation is fundamental to Canada's economic performance, and the transportation system requires the right policy foundations to ensure its ability to support the long-term needs of Canada. Strategic investments in transport can facilitate the productivity and create sustainable economic growth. Without this, individuals spend more time sitting in traffic and supply chains become less efficient. In simple terms, without a strong transportation system, our economy suffers. With lockdowns implemented across the country for the better part of the last 2 years, like countless other sectors, the Canadian transportation sector was significantly impacted, with ridership falling by more than 80%. While Canadians were listening to stay-at-home orders, many of our transit operators continued to provide essential support to get those who needed to commute where they needed to go safely and efficiently. As we move out of lockdowns, Canadians are starting to move and use our transportation systems more frequently. Our transportation system and sector has an opportunity to contribute to reducing emissions and create good quality jobs. Today's panel will discuss how our transportation systems are critical to helping move Canadians. Joining me today are 4 individuals from a variety of different transportation modes that help move Canadians. I'm pleased to introduce Matthew Cassidy, President and CEO of Coach Atlantic, Kevin Quinn, CEO of TransLink, Laura Miller, Head of Public Policy and Communications at Uber Canada, and Rita Toporowski, Vice President, Customer Experience at Via Rail. After our initial discussion, we'll open up the conversation to our audience for questions via Slido. To get our discussion going today, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves and ask our first question. How are you helping move Canadians? I'll turn it over to Matthew to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Robin, and welcome everyone. So my name is Matthew Cassidy, President of Coach Atlantic and Maritime Bus. So we're a family-run operation, and we concentrate on the motor coach and bus transportation. Pre-COVID, we have 275 pieces of equipment and 500 employees operating out of Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. We do school bus. We do school bus homeschool services. We do island transit here in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. We have an intercity service maritime bus, which connects 40 communities across Atlantic Canada. And then we have our group charter business that is inbound tours, multi-day tours, and that tourism driving piece. So how we've been moving, we haven't shut down our operations over the last 2 years. We've been operating at extreme reduced capacity, but we've been here to move essential people, essential services that needed to happen throughout the last 2 years. And very excited over the last, at least the last 3 months, to see people getting moving again, and really seeing that pent up demand for what we see is to come. And, it's interesting, like transportation is such a necessary piece to restarting the economy. It's a multiplier effect, and we're kind of like the wheel and the visible wheel in the background, that without this wheel, things don't move. So it's a big part of how we're going to rebound from this. Looking forward to chatting with everyone else as we go forward in this panel.
Thanks, Matt. Kevin, I'll turn to you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. So my name's Kevin Quinn. I'm the CEO at TransLink. And TransLink is Metro Vancouver's regional transportation authority. We operate a really, truly multimodal system that includes about a 1,700 bus fleet, automated light rail rapid transit, the SkyTrain system, our passenger ferries, commuter rail, and accessible transit. So it's a really, truly multimodal system. And pre-pandemic, TransLink was moving upwards of around 500,000 customers per day on the transit system. And we sit today about 57, 60% of pre-COVID ridership. That's one of the highest sort of returns to ridership in North America. And since the pandemic, we're still moving upwards of 250, 300,000 customers per day. Something really cool about TransLink is that as the Regional Transportation Authority, we're not only responsible for moving people by transit, but for also increasing access to active transportation, something that's really important to us, such as walking, cycling, rolling, which we know Canadians really embraced during the pandemic. Like a lot of other Canadian agencies, TransLink has done a great job keeping the region moving throughout the pandemic as people are gradually returning to old habits. We're seeing some real spikes in ridership from folks returning to work, returning to school in September, and various events, concerts, sporting events. We've seen some real spikes during some local festivals as well as for Canucks games. And so, TransLink is really playing, I think, a really key role in helping reconnect the region as the economy is starting to reopen. I'll just note that, Canadian systems are really known for understanding the importance of frequency. And as they say in transit, frequency really is freedom. I think Canadian systems have really stepped up throughout COVID and are as I noted, really going to continue to play a key role in rebuilding economies throughout the country and really getting people where they need to go. Really looking forward to the panel today. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And Laura, I'll turn it over to you next.
Great, thanks so much, Robin. It's great to be here, and particularly on a panel with individuals who work for transportation companies that I frequent. So when I'm out in Atlantic Canada pre-COVID, obviously Via Rail, took my first Via Rail trip this summer since the pandemic, and Kevin, big fan of TransLink from when I lived out in the Lower Mainland. And I think, to your point, really helped to move people and move the economy and move communities forward. Uber obviously connects the physical and the digital world to make movement happen at the push of the button for everyone, whether that's moving people or goods safely and sustainably. We could certainly talk about Uber Eats and delivery, or even Uber Freight, which is our newest line of business, but we'll focus on rideshare today, and in terms of how that complements the kind of the transportation ecosystem. But for us, it's really about providing affordable, accessible options for riders, but also flexible earning opportunities for drivers. And in 2020, which was the year of the pandemic, that's when we decided to do our first kind of impact report to kind of truly understand the impact that Uber is having in communities. So even in the midst of the pandemic, during the stay-at-home orders, we helped save Canadians 13 million hours through rideshare. That's the equivalent of driving from Halifax to Vancouver over 230,000 times. 63% of riders without access to a car, I count myself in that category, say one of the reasons why they're able to not own a private car is because of the accessibility of rideshare services. And 1 in 14 riders report that they are taking an Uber to either be their first or last mile connection to the public transit system. So really excited to have this conversation today and to talk about the overall ecosystem and how it works together.
Thanks, Laura. And I'll, last but not least, I'll turn to you, Rita.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks to everybody else who already spoke. The importance of each one of our services is incredible from a Canadian perspective. We're a national provider, so basically we serve Canadians coast to coast to coast. We started back in 1977 because basically CP and CN withdrew from passenger rail, and the government came in and said, no, we need to protect passenger rail within Canada. And we've been growing ever since. I joined Via Rail, so I'm the Vice President of Customer Experience. I joined Via Rail about 7 years ago. So my primary focus and my only focus is making sure that we have the right service for the customers and ensuring that we provide the right level of service for our customers so they keep coming back. And I can tell you that between 2014 to 2019, we grew dramatically because we really put a lot of focus on understanding what the customers were looking for, what they needed. And we grew our service levels from a frequency perspective. I remember hearing frequency is king. Yes. If you put the frequencies out there and you make it easy for people to choose this type of service, they will choose it. The difficulty always comes when it's inconvenient. So we have to make the solution easy. So we talk a lot about finding the smarter way to move people. And part of that's frequency, part of it's the equipment we use and our technology that we use and so forth. And we spent a lot of time trying to build that over the last little while. Between 2014 and 2019, we grew our passenger counts about 32%. We hit huge numbers in 2019 with our record numbers of $400 million in revenue, which we hadn't seen before, and we hit 5 million passengers. So that was telling us that the changes we were making in the company were the right ones to make. It also told us that Canadians and people who visit Canada want to travel by rail. The one thing we also noticed, and it's great to be on a panel with other modes of transportation, is we interconnect. None of us is an island unto ourselves. In reality, people often use multiple modes of travel to get from place to place to place. And it's really important to understand that because Canadians have different needs. We serve the ocean, we call it the ocean between Halifax and Montreal. There's smaller communities there, or they're going to Montreal and they're connecting somewhere else. We have our regional services, and some of them go up to Churchill. Completely different type of travel. In some places, they have no other options. And within the corridor, lots of business, lots of leisure, visiting family and friends. But we do it often in conjunction with other modes of transportation as well. The exciting part we saw with the growth that we had was we started looking at how do we continue to build that growth into the future. So we had to take a look at investment. So we're in the midst of a dramatic project with a new reservation system that'll come online next year. New fleet, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later as well. A huge investment in new fleet, which will make for lots of positive changes for consumers. And in addition to that, I have been working with promoting the idea of high frequency rail within the Quebec-Ontario corridor to allow for us to have passenger rail tracks that are dedicated for passenger rail. And as a result of it, you can shorten travel times, increase frequencies, lots of different improvements we can have. So we've taken the success we've had and really taken a look at what do we need to do in modernizing what we're doing as a company for the future for Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. I think one of the common themes that everybody spoke of there really was the growth that each of them were seeing before the pandemic, and then naturally the pandemic has forced us back really in there. So I'm wondering if we can dive into what are the opportunities and challenges that the sector is facing as we move into recovery, and how you're addressing them. Rita, I'll turn to you first.
Sure. It was an abrupt stop to our growth in 2019 when we switched over to 2020, and all of a sudden we actually started 2020 with blockades before we even started COVID, so we were kind of in a halt to begin with. Dramatic impact with respect to COVID. At its peak, we were down to 95% of our ridership because we had to halt a lot of the different services for a period of time. We laid off over 1,000 employees. We have over 3,100, but it was a dramatic shift in terms of what we were doing. And where we're at right now is we've been growing our services methodically and very, very systematically, taking into account what we need to from a health and safety perspective to ensure two things. One, our passengers are comfortable and safe on board our trains, or as they come to our trains and get on board our trains. And in addition to that, employees, the same thing, because we have to protect our employee base from a health and safety perspective to make sure they're there to serve the customer the next day. So lots of effort working with different bodies in provincially, municipally, as well as federally to ensure that we have the right procedures and policies in place. We're following what we need to from a health and safety on board, and we keep our passengers safe. And what we have seen is as we've gradually been resuming our service, Canadians want to travel. There was this pent up demand, so we add some services on board and there's a spike in terms of bookings. So there is this pent up demand of people wanting to start move again. And what we're doing right now, and we believe, is we're in the midst of shifting, and we have implemented the vaccine policy, both for our employees, but also for passengers. So, they have to show proof of vaccine, they have to show PCR tests, and things are continuing to evolve from that perspective. But what we've proven along the way is, once again, the more services we put out there and systematically make sure that we're protecting both those bodies of people are starting to come back, and we expect to be back 100% by next June. And with once again gradual return in a lot of cases, we've protected some of the very regional services that are the sole type of travel. Example to Churchill, that never got changed. But a lot of the other services that were very much impacted from a business perspective diminished, and we've been growing them. We're sitting at about 75% right now within the Quebec-Ontario corridor, We're going to start a second service, Halifax to Montreal in December, and then more return of service on the Canadian from Toronto to Vancouver next spring into next summer, as well as full service in the Quebec-Ontario corridor by next summer as well. So all that to say, it's all about managing the return. The difficulty as well is 1,000 people we laid off, we got to bring them all back. So we have to retrain, we have to recruit if some people aren't coming back because people had to make choices and get other jobs. So I think that the biggest thing is not that people don't want to come back, but from a passenger perspective, but that we have to build our system, our infrastructure back up from an employee perspective.
Well, thanks for that. And Laura, how about from an Uber perspective?
Yeah, so, I think the first thing is just, taking a moment to just reflect on the fact that I think because of what happened, the world stopped moving. And so there was obviously a drop in demand, but I think it's also worth just taking a moment to pay tribute to drivers and workers who continued the limited service, but ultimately there were essential workers who needed to get to and from their place of work, whether it was a grocery store, a pharmacy, a hospital, a clinic. So I think that was extraordinary to me, that even in the face of the beginnings of COVID, the uncertainty around it, what was it, how was it spreading, that you still had drivers and other workers who showed up every day to provide such a vital essential service. And I think that's really important for us to remember as we continue through. For us, we've been very focused on trying to help share critical health information about the efficacy of vaccines. We had a partnership with Health Canada in the spring, and we sent out Health Canada information to all of the millions of Canadians who have access to our platform. Just really wanting to do what we could do to help reduce the any kind of vaccine hesitancy, because we knew that once we kind of got to a good level, that the economy would start to reopen, and that was the way we could start moving people again. So we took a lot of time to try to help kind of promote those messages. We also contributed, discounted and free rides to help our most vulnerable get to the vaccine clinics, because for us, this was really key to how we were going to reopen the economy. And we've been pleased. Like I think as Canadians, there certainly would love to see more people get vaccinated. Excited to see children get vaccinated now. But in terms of where we are starting to see that, and the demand is returning. And I think some of those normal use cases, returning to work, so the commuter use case, people being out late on Friday and Saturday nights, that's exciting to see. People going to live events, concerts, different games. For us, the recovery there is really important. So one of the things that we're very focused on is, as the demand is increasing, is ensuring that there's enough supply as well, because our model is unique in terms of we're a platform that connects riders with drivers. We've been really focused on signing up new drivers in accordance to local regulations like license type, car age, and then just really trying to highlight the flexibility that the platform provides in terms of being able to work when and where you want. 74% of drivers on our platform have other full-time responsibilities. So it could be a job, it could be their caregiver, a parent, a student. And so this is just a perfect form of work to kind of fit around your schedule, to optimize for your schedule or to optimize for earnings. So we're spending quite a bit of time as cities are opening back up to ensure that we do have enough drivers to service that demand.
And Kevin, what about opportunities? I'll ignore the challenge question, and just because I'll put it from a Canucks standpoint, that I think that may hurt you in some ridership given how things are going. But what opportunities do you see, Kevin, on your part?
Sure. So a few things. So I'll note that the pandemic is really, we've seen some new trends come out, and I'll kind of reiterate some things that have been noted. I mean, some of those trends are good, like more digital access, remote work. I mean, this is good for the environment, right? But some things not so good, like people say driving alone in cars. And so I think, like any business, I really see this as an opportunity to kind of rethink our product, right? So as a transit agency, how are we meeting the needs of the region? What does our product look like? I'll also just note, from a financial standpoint, this ridership deficit that, our fares comprise about 40% of our budget. And so we've got some real financial pressure. And so the funding gap that we have is now anywhere between 100 and 300 million per year over the next 10 years, depending on kind of how you do the math. And so part of that also is stemming from the gas tax. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to rethink the gas tax, which we know is a declining funding source. And I think that, in a way, the pandemic probably advanced the criticality of that discussion by a few years. And so I think it's a good thing. The last thing that I've got to note is climate change. And so, in the last 5 months, as many of you know, British Columbia has seen some really catastrophic impacts caused by extreme weather, between heat domes, a tornado, atmospheric rivers causing widespread displacement, flooding, mudslides. Everything that you've been seeing on the news has been really catastrophic to the region. We know in Metro Vancouver that the largest single source of GHG emissions comes from transportation. That's about 35% of GHGs. And so I think now is really a good opportunity for leaders to really lean in, start thinking about some tangible solutions to the climate emergency, moving quickly. I think it's an opportunity to rethink infrastructure, to rethink kind of how we rebuild, and being very intentional about resilience and how we build our facilities, how we replace our fleet, things like that. So lots of challenges, but I do think there are some opportunities in there as well.
Thank you. And I noticed you didn't bite on my poke there on the Canucks. So,
loved it. I loved
it. And Matt, how about from a coach perspective out east?
So I think there's a ton of opportunities, I think, for our industry going forward. Our industry is made up primarily of like small and medium-sized family-run operations, and I think there's a ton of benefits going forward. We're truly a green alternative when it comes to public transportation, just like Evan and Rita's on this panel as well. We have, we are a community connector, and we do have this whole tourism aspect of our business too. But from a opportunities, Rita talks about intermodal perspective, and actually Rita and I are intermodal partners. So, her ocean that comes down from Montreal, it stops in Moncton, and if you go right from, you can book a ticket to Charlottetown, but on Rita's website, you get to Moncton and then you hop on the bus to get from Moncton to Charlottetown. And there's a ton of opportunities with motor coaches, because there's places that we can go that, doesn't make sense to have rails. And, how do you run something privately instead of a public transit agency in terms of more rural or regional opportunities? And how do you connect this all together? And I think that is a huge opportunity, is how do you work intermodally to get more places connected? And Laura and her company with Uber have a part to play in this too, right? Because if someone gets to the Charlottetown terminal or our Halifax terminal, they can take Rita to me. Well, they want to get, 10 minutes down the road and they have a bunch of luggage and they can't get there. Well, that's how Laura can, and Uber can fit in too. So how do you make it seamless? How do you make it easy? How's it on one platform? All those type of questions in terms of tremendous opportunities. Because if you can make it convenient, people will take it, right? And then you can get more cars off the road to make it from there. The biggest challenge, though, from a motor coach perspective is survival. Our industry, as I say, is, family-run private companies that have been shuttered for 2 years. Thank goodness for some of the supports that have been around to help us survive to this point. But we have a huge ramp up in front of us, and the capital costs associated with restarting our organizations, restarting our companies, are substantial. And it's a big challenge with, small, family-run companies to be able to get things back on the road after, what the losses incurred for the last 2 years. So our biggest challenge as a motor coach sector would be, how do we ramp up to be there, to be the ones to move the people, and to be the ones to kind of be this tourism generating piece, and to, when cruise ships arrive back into our region, when tourists want to come back in and do, whether it's a tour of Newfoundland or a tour of the Rockies, motor coach transportation plays a huge part in spinning our economies. So making sure that our industry is there to support it in the coming years is our biggest challenge.
Yeah, and maybe we can dive into that a little bit more, and talk about how really the transportation sector is helping unlock that economic potential. Maybe Laura, I'll turn to you for your thoughts first.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's a really great question. And as a very young company, we're kind of almost approaching our teenage years, 13 years globally, close to 10 in Canada. I think it's really important for us to kind of think about the impact Uber has as a platform, the power and the reach of the platform from coast to coast. Digital economy is often missed by kind of your traditional measurements, but it's extremely valuable. And so, when I think about, the research that we've done in trying to understand the economic impact that we've had in Canada and for Canadians, I think there's a few things that kind of come to mind. So first of all, we unlocked an estimated $6.5 billion in economic value in the pandemic year in 2020. And that includes the impact of, earnings for drivers, delivery people, restaurants, also kind of the wider indirect and induced multiplier effects created by the wider supply chain. The other thing that we think about a lot is, consumer surplus. So consumer surplus, obviously, I think many of us are familiar with it, but it's what you are willing to pay versus what you do pay. And it's a $23 billion consumer surplus here in Canada. So we again are providing great value to riders who definitely see the value, whether it's a late night trip or taking that first mile to get to the public transit or to get to VIA, or to get off the coach. So that's really important for us as well. And ultimately for drivers, I mean, we talked about the flexibility. We talked about how they have the ability to work when and where they want. But one of the things that we always talk about is flexibility. And from 80, 85%, 90% of people say flexibility is the number one benefit to them. And we put that to the test and we say, okay, well, would you prefer flexibility or a 20% boost in earnings? They choose flexibility. So flexibility, the value of that is worth an additional $323 million to drivers. And so, this is the way that we think about this as a tech company that's active in the digital economy in terms of, really empowering people to be in control. So whether it's they're driving and they're providing that service, or, they're choosing to ride and they're saving time, they're able to multitask, it's a way for them to get their groceries, that provides huge value. And we hear that time and time again from riders and drivers, which is why there's such demand.
Yeah, and Kevin, maybe I'll turn this over to you next, just for your thoughts.
Sure. So, we've got some big projects underway that I think are really unlocking economic potential for the region. In coordination with the province, we've got our Surrey Langley SkyTrain, about a $4 billion project. That's for the area south of the Fraser River. It's one of the fastest growing in the region in the country. It's expected by the year 2050 that the city of Surrey, city of Langley, and the township of Langley will have welcomed about 420,000 new residents. By 2035, it's projected that about 80,000 residents are going to live within about 800 meters of the project's new station. So that's a lot of really good, really high density residential right next to the stations there. So that'll get under construction in 2024, be complete by 2028. We also have our Broadway subway project. It's about $3 billion, a 6-kilometer extension of the Millennium Line headed out towards UBC, one of the busiest corridors, frankly, in North America. With 6 underground stations connecting communities. So you have these really big projects that are happening right now, but then we're also looking to the future. And so we're in the process right now of finishing up Transport 2050, which is our 30-year vision for the future of transportation in the region. And that includes a quadrupling of our existing rapid transit network, essentially going from 100 to 400 kilometers of rapid transit, as well as an 850-kilometer bikeway network. So, I think in terms of unlocking economic potential, it's about, what are we doing today? We've got some big projects underway. It's also setting a vision for the future and letting people know what's coming down the line and demonstrating leadership and senior government support for a larger transportation vision that people will know will always be there, that they can rely on to get them around.
Matt, how about from your side?
So I think that I'm not going to start quoting billions of dollars that we're going to be spending on Kevin, but where I think we help unlock potential is bringing people to rural and small communities. And, right now everyone talks about, staying at home for the pandemic. During COVID, there was savings, people want to travel. So, people, for example, fly into St. John's, Newfoundland, and they're hopping on our motor coaches with one of our partner travel companies, McCarthy's Party, and they're going to rural Newfoundland to spend for meals and hotel nights, and spreading those dollars around that St. Anthony, Newfoundland, up on the Avalon Peninsula. If it wasn't for motor coach transportation, they wouldn't get the near amount of the tourists. again, for example, we contribute to 85,000 hotel nights in our region annually pre-COVID. And again, all of our services help move people around. And when you're moving people around, you're taking dollars from, and people are traveling for leisure and for business, they're spending in those cities. So being able to have efficient, safe, having affordable ways of travel and moving people around allows like rural communities to survive. And I think that's how we play a part in this, is like we provide those services when when the cruise ships come into the port of Halifax. Well, they're hopping on motor coaches and they're going to rural Nova Scotia to be able to look at Peggy's Cove, and they stop at the gift shop along the way. So that's how we help unlock economic potential, is taking people from dense metro urban places and moving them into more rural spots, which that's we have to have that balance between rural and urban to go from there. So that's a big part of what the motor coach industry does, and we're hopefully to be able to do it going forward.
Rita, how about from your side?
Oh, great. I'm going to piggyback on something Matt said and Kevin said, and we talk about communities, but we also talk about investment, and we're looking at it from both perspectives, because we serve over 400 communities across Canada, and economy gets stimulated when you start reconnecting people again. And so it's imperative that we all get back to 100% of what we were doing before, and better. And better meaning different projects, better improvements, technology, infrastructure, and so forth, because that's going to stimulate the economy. I think us from a VIA perspective, we spend over $350 million, across 2,400 different Canadian suppliers. So there's money that needs to go back into the economy through those suppliers that's been kind of halted and stymied a little bit over the last little while. So how quickly we can pull that together and function together and get people moving amongst those communities is really going to help support that stimulus. And from a project perspective, I mentioned a little briefly about this new fleet we're bringing in. It's a $1 billion project. We're bringing in a whole bunch of new cars that's going to start popping up. And actually, we'll get a preview of them next week. A new platform from a reservation system. And the project that we're most excited about trying to help get across the finish line is this high frequency rail idea, because that would require a massive infrastructure project. So from a stimulus to the economy, jobs associated with that would be dramatic within the Ontario-Quebec corridor. Plus, it would also all of a sudden connect communities we have not connected before. So once again, it goes back to, you have the community side of things, but you have the project side of things and the improvements you have to make, and that helps stimulate the economy, I think.
Well, I think that dedicated rail service as well, or that track, I should say, is something that also helps kind of an ongoing issue of supply chain as well, right? Is allowing for that for those companies that you mentioned to really get their goods kind of out to market quicker.
And if I may just make one more wrap-up comment associated with that, it goes back to, again, the intermodality, because the projects that are happening in Vancouver help move people onto our trains, and then what we're doing with Atlantic Canada, and then Uber's right across the board, because no matter where you are, to get to a train station or to get to a bus station, sometimes you need a different mode to get there, and you don't always want to be driving your car and parking. So how well we each do individually is amplified with how well we should be doing collectively, because then that's going to help all the better for right across the country.
And maybe lastly, before I take some questions from our listeners, is really to dive into the issue of how the sector is working to respond to Canadians' needs. And I guess kind of expanding on that is how are you being more accessible and available to Canadians that need to access the transportation, and then the critical question of as Kevin mentioned, and I'll turn it to him first, but the move towards net zero. So maybe Kevin, you wanna take a stab at that first.
Sure. So in terms of how we're responding to Canadian needs, I mean, I think as we look at our ridership, riders are more connected than ever and are more data driven than ever. And so, we've partnered, for example, with the Transit app to provide things like bus capacity predictions, right? So customers in the palm of their hand have information about that they can make their own decisions around safety, about we've all come out of this COVID world. We're still in it, right? Of social distancing, all that kind of stuff, right? So the more information you can give people, the better. I think we've got to be very customer centric and recognize it's a changing landscape. And again, very much have a competitive product. On accessibility, I think, we're really looking to increase access to communities that need more service, and something that we think about often in our future planning, and especially with T2050, is asking developers and municipalities to really work with us when planning new developments, to think about how transportation requirements factor into site planning. But we also recognize that we've got to start giving transit, I think, more priority, and give transportation in general, a lot of the folks here, more priority. Increasing our coverage area is important, but an infrequent and an unreliable bus service isn't going to do anybody any good. And so we've all got to work together towards that. We're on the net zero thing real quick. We all recognize and are working in sectors of making our transportation system more net zero, getting closer and closer. I mean, right now, about a third of our customers every year are riding emissions free, based on whether it's electric trolley or battery electric bus or our entire SkyTrain network. And so we've got a low carbon fleet strategy that's going to ensure all of our vehicles are carbon free by 2040. And so we've got our own climate action strategy with new targets. And so I think there's got to be a recognition that we've all got our own part to play in this. And so I think public transit, and a lot of the folks, I don't just say public transit, especially on this call, are all doing their part to get us to net zero, because we recognize that climate change is real and it's happening today.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And Rita, you'd started mentioning some of this, maybe, so I'll turn this over to you next, though, on the accessibility and availability piece.
Sure, thanks. We're focused on making sure everything we provide is fully accessible to anybody who actually wants to take our service. So from a platform perspective, it was really important that we modernized what we were doing so that we could better present our offers to everyone in a form that they could actually see it, use it, read it, hear it, because everyone needs different ways of actually getting access to the information. Two of our main projects, I think, that are really focused on sustainability, but also access, are related to the high frequency rail. One, from a community perspective, we make that easier. We make, travel time shorter. We can increase frequency. We can improve reliability. People get out of their cars. We improve what we're doing from a sustainability perspective. We have a contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gases by doing that. And the fleet we're bringing in is brand new technology. So once again, from an efficiency perspective, an energy efficiency perspective, we're going to be improving what we're doing today. So within the Ontario-Quebec corridor, we're going to be using this new fleet. It's going to be the latest technology and the biggest improvement we can potentially make right now from an environmental perspective. The other really exciting piece is we've configured the trains so that they're fully accessible. So it's much easier for anybody who has any kind of reduced mobility needs, who can bring partners with them. Each one of the cars or each one of our levels of service is fully accessible. In addition, things like Braille seat numbering. We have enhanced wheelchair spaces. We have built-in lifts for wheelchairs. So we're truly trying to make it easier for anyone to board our trains and use our services, because they need access. And combining that with what we're trying to do from an infrastructure perspective and frequency and building, we make it more accessible to many more communities. So I think both those things is really the way we're trying to focus in the future.
Yeah, and Matthew, maybe you can expand. You'd mentioned the rural and northern communities connections. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so we currently service 40 communities in and around Atlantic Canada, and part of the place, like some of these small rural places in northern New Brunswick and the South Shore of Nova Scotia, up and through Sydney, Cape Breton, very remote areas, and to have passengers and parcels be able to travel back reliably, Rita keeps on saying frequency and reliability, that's what sells in our business. So that's an important piece, and we would love to do more of it too. And I think one of the challenges that we have sometimes as a private operator is that government programs get rolled out with great concept and they get approved, but they don't have the legs. So, for example, there's a rural transit fund that was recently announced by our federal government to be able to enhance and add more rural like transit systems. So intercity would be a great piece for that. But currently, the criteria is just for non-for-profits. So as a for-profit company, you know, to be able to, which is a corporation, that's ultimately our goal. We haven't gotten there the last little while, but you know, to be able to access this, we could do a bang-up job in that because we have the expertise and we're in the area. So that's some of the challenges we have on that side of it. And then on the net zero side, we're currently, you know, we operate the City of Charlottetown's transit system. And, you know, we are working with the City of Charlottetown currently about coming up with an electrification strategy. We also have some other ideas in terms of some of our other business models around the cruise ships and how we could use electric shuttle coaches to be able to service those needs. Like we see this as the future. And again, it'd be great too, as you know, private companies to be able to access some of the funds associated with some of these net zero transit initiatives, and to be able to do our part to be able to move in this net zero concept, because we appreciate we're a huge consumer of energy when it comes to diesel and the infrastructure needed to charge. So the more public facing and the more like school buses and transit buses and coaches from a commercial perspective that get turned into electric, the whole electric infrastructure system is going to get rolled out faster. So we're a big proponent of how do we play our part in getting there. It's a huge switch in how we think and how we do, but it's important that we get there because it's part of who we're going to be. And again, bit by bit, our company will make sure that we get there.
Laura, how about from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from an from an access point of view, in 2020 we're the ride sharing app in the lower so the pandemic, there was demand, and so very pleased that we were able to launch the apps there, and they've been quite successful. We are looking to expand to provide our services in BC as well, in addition to the rest of Quebec. From a net zero perspective, we have committed globally to becoming a net zero platform by 2040. Very ambitious goals, but as the largest mobility provider, we appreciate that we have a responsibility and we need to do that. So what does that look like today? For riders who want to be more eco-conscious, there's a few things. So one, we do have low emission or zero emission rides in 16 cities. In 16 cities, you can open your app, you can choose Uber Green, and you'll either get a hybrid or an electric vehicle, which again, if you want to ensure that you are in a lower emission or a zero emission vehicle, it's a great option for you. We just rolled that out in the last kind of 18 months across the country. The other thing we're really excited about, and I know Rita and Kevin talked about this as well, Matthew, but just multimodal. So we're piloting right now in the city of Toronto. If you open your app, you can actually see what your combined trip option is between public transit and UberX. So maybe UberX is your first mile, and then you get to the station, and then it makes sense for you to take the line to your destination. And so we think that's really important as well. Really excited to pilot that product in Toronto, but also in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. We have journey planning, because sometimes the best way for you to get from A to B is public transit, right? So I think for us, it's really about having multiple options in the app. Really excited as well as cities start to, maybe it's a bit slow, but they start to embrace, a micromobility, scooters, e-bikes, having those available in the app as well. Because I think the dream is, you're able to take, the TTC in Toronto, you get to Union Station, you hop on the Via Rail, and then when you arrive in Montreal, you can take a scooter, or you can take an Uber Green or something, right? So just appreciating the full journey and what we can do there. So that's something that we've invested quite a bit in, and we're excited to see that continue to expand. And then on the driver side, so again, talking about the power of the platform, we have tens of thousands of drivers and delivery people on the platform. And so how do we help them understand how they can make a fair transition to an electric vehicle? And what does that mean for them? And what incentives are available? What charging infrastructure is required, or is there charging infrastructure nearby? So that's something that we're leaning into as well as we go forward. And in partnerships, we have a partnership with GM to provide an additional incentive to a driver on the platform to get them into an electric vehicle. Really excited that the last 2 weeks we announced a partnership with Shell Green Lots, which is amazing in Vancouver. That's going to be the pilot, which potentially could be rolled out across North America. And what that is basically 3 new fast charging stations that are designed to increase EV access for drivers and delivery people. So again, just trying to do what we can as a platform, leveraging our global reach to try to help drivers and delivery people make that transition. And so, we're excited. There's obviously a lot to do, a lot more to do, but I think it's a very important commitment for us to live through.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I wanted to thank all of our panelists today for their further thoughts and for the discussion on this topic. I'll turn over for kind of quick closing remarks and thoughts. Maybe starting with you, Laura.
Yeah, great. So thanks so much, Robin. And it was a pleasure to be on a panel with Matthew, Rita, and Kevin, and just talking about the ecosystem and how, Canadians, visitors, residents, how they choose to combine, whether it's public transit, rideshare, coach, we didn't talk about airlines, but they're very important in terms of the overall ecosystem and how we can work together. Because I think ultimately, if we are able to give more convenient options, we can, move people away from private car ownership. And ultimately, that's a great way for us to try to drive down emissions. So again, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and to continue to talk about it in the chambers. Continued advocacy for transportation issue, but also net zero. Commitments in the council that's doing some important work on recommendations to the government. I think, obviously it's, particularly on net zero, on sustainability, it's a team sport. We're not going to get there on our own. We all have to collectively work together. And so really excited to see what's to come and excited for the hard work ahead.
Thanks, Laura. And Rita.
Apologies, I kept it on mute for a second. Thank you, Robin. Thanks, Laura. I guess in summation, there's been a lot said over the course of the last number of questions, but we're really focused on making sure we create a smarter way to move people. Internally, right now, the smarter way is for us to get back to 100% of service. So, we're going to build it back as much as we can. We see the demands there. People want to come back. And the sales have been showing that. So as we put more service out there, more people show up, and we're going to be making sure we can find extra capacity so we can hopefully increase the size of our consists or our train sets over the holidays, because people are going to want to go visit family and friends, and they're going to want to do things they didn't get to do last year. So, and it's our mandate to enable that to happen. In addition to that, in parallel, we have to focus on these big modernization projects and make sure we deliver on a platform that is easier for people to use from a digital platform perspective, to book services, get information, be able to move around our stations in an easier way. In addition to that, the new fleet that's coming in, we just got our new train set, a first train set that we're going to be winterizing or testing this next winter. So we're going to see how well it works and test as much as we can out of it, create processes so that as we bring it online late next year into the coming years after that, it's seamless from a passenger perspective. And all they're going to do is see something new and shiny that works better, is more reliable, and is more accessible for passengers. So really our focus is on get back to service, provide consumers what they really want right now, build and modernize our own offering, and then ensure that what we're doing is in step with our intermodal partners. Because at the end of the day, we're going to go much further together than we can otherwise. And that's what the country demands, and that's what we need to help provide.
Thanks, Rita. Kevin?
Sure. So first, I do want to really thank the Canadian Chamber for hosting this panel today. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I've absolutely loved it. So I'll just note, as you know, this is a really tough moment for British Columbia as we're continuing to recover from some extreme weather events that have brought a lot of flooding and mudslides to the Fraser Valley and the Lower Mainland's key connection points to the rest of Canada. And so I think, we are seeing that the impacts of climate change really are no longer just sort of this abstract theory, but it's hitting Canada now. And so my take on this is that, we do have a collective responsibility to meet this moment, and we've got to respond and be aggressive about that and adapt and mitigate the impacts from our changing climate that we're seeing. And so we've got to really invest in shared and active transportation, all the transportation that we sort of represent here today, if we're going to tackle emissions in cities across the country, because we know we have the technology, we know we have the know-how to do this. But that said, I think all of us sit here knowing that we can't do this alone. But, we know that keeping our existing infrastructure and services running isn't enough. We've got to continue to invest in our transportation networks and our transit networks to really improve and expand all the services that we deliver. So, for our part, we're looking forward to the finalization and implementation of the Permanent Transit Fund, which is going to be a real game-changing program for us and really help get us to that net zero that we all want to get to. So I'm really looking forward to working with partners across the country, building on our strong relationships with the government of Canada and the province of British Columbia to deliver a lot of these key investments, and honestly working with many of you to really meet this moment together as a real unified transportation system across Canada. So thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robin. And again, thank you to the Chamber of Commerce to be able to represent the motor coach side of things, motor coach industry along, like on this panel with, VIA and, Vancouver, like TransLink and Uber. Like that's a very great honor to kind of bring light to some of our issues. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that, because I do think that our industry is at a bit of a fork in the road. I think that we, hopefully, our industry and our companies can get through this and get through the next 12 to 18 months to have a solid footing. Because I do think that we are part of the solution. And I think that we're going to be part of what gets the intermodal piece going. It's going to be part of what allows net zero to happen. And having these, regionalized private companies working in collection with government and government agencies and some of the bigger players is a huge part of how we're going to get to where we want to get to. So we need to make sure that they're there and there is that connectivity from different regional networks to be able to do our intercity. There's just so many great things we can do when you have all these assets on the road, but we got to do it effectively, right? We have to make sure we don't need a bunch of things running up and down the same highways, right? What is the best way to do something, and how do we make sure that we kind of do things working together and making sure that we're doing things properly and just the best way possible in terms of greenhouses and investments and accessibility. We're at a turning point in terms of what transportation was and what transportation will be are two different things. So and again, you can talk about Toronto and Montreal and that corridor in the big cities, but how do we help smaller places such on the East Coast where, there is diversity, there's not as much density, be able to get to some of these net zero targets too. And, in the prairies, and, the density is a big part of, Canada's huge. So how do we balance the two things? So it's been a great panel. So as long as we keep this conversation going day by day, we'll make progress.
Thanks, Matthew. And thanks for everybody again to our panelists and for those who are watching. I'll turn it over to our MC for the day, Carl Tabak, who's chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, for his closing remarks. Carl.
Well, thank you very much, Robin. And a big thank you to all our participants today for these in-depth discussions and remarks. Merci à tous. C'était, je pense, le contenu des discussions aujourd'hui était exceptionnel et j'ai certainement eu beaucoup de plaisir à assister aux délibérations. Quite simply, there's no economic growth or recovery without a robust transportation and infrastructure industry. As made evident by today's conversations, we saw how the construction industry is quite literally building Canadian communities, and heard about the innovation and investment that will keep us moving forward. We discussed the critical importance of transportation to our economy and connectivity. We also covered a lot of grounds today, and I don't think there can be any doubt of the key role these two sectors play, not only in our recovery, but to our long-term sustainable economic vitality. Thank you to all of our speakers who brought these important topics into the spotlight. A big thank you to Brad Carr for the fireside chat, to Kevin Lee and Chris Selkin for joining us for our one-on-one conversations, and of course, to our panelists and moderators for their contributions to these conversations today. Merci beaucoup, merci à tous. I'd also like once again to thank our sponsors and our membership for making today happen. Thank you. We couldn't have done that without you. And of course, a big thank you to each and every one of you in the audience for taking the time to join us today and to engage in the conversation. So I look forward to seeing you again soon in one of our next events. Merci encore à tous. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye-bye.